Good evening, witches, warlocks, sorcerers, adepts, friends, fans, family, and followers to Season 3, Episode 10 of the hit underground occult radio show known as Knights of the Nephilim, brought to you by Celestial Oddites Radio and the Coterie of Samil Arcane Occult Order, bringing you 100% real and raw underground entertainment. As always, I will be your host and guide on this obscure and mysterious journey into magic and mysticism, darkness and divination. I am Reverend Frater Crow of the Coterie of Samil Arcane Occult Order, and I want to thank you for listening in this evening. Whether listening live, streaming after the fact, or you've downloaded us to your device for on the go, any which of the three is fine. We do want to thank you for your patronage and support, but make sure you click the like, share, and follow button on whatever platform you're tuning in from, whether it be iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Spreaker, Castbox, Google Play, Amazon Podcasts, or any of the other platforms in between that I might have missed. We air across everywhere, so as I said, listen where you like, but by clicking those buttons, it moves us up the podcast community rankings, allows more people to discover the show, keeps you in the loop with new episodes as they air, and gives you unfiltered access to our past archives, not only of this show here, Knights of the Nephilim, which is based upon esoteric science, occult doctrine, and ritual magic, interviewing and talking with the biggest and best names in occultism, from ritual practitioners and toolmakers to authors and theologians, or it be one of our other shows like Celestial Oddities The Pong, Pair of Normal Guys podcast, where we deep dive into subject matter of the supernatural and paranormal, bring on professionals within that field, and from time to time do special episodes known as Odd World, where we take on phone calls from listeners just like you from around the world to hear your extraordinary and unexplainable stories of the paranormal. Or lastly, we have Uncovering the Underground, where we deep dive into interviews with artists from music to modeling, stars of the big screen, comedy, oddities, and everything in between. We aim to give everyone out there something that they'll love. So make sure you share it around. We would really appreciate it. Now, before we get started with this evening's episode, we would like to thank our sponsors, Aracne Arcane Services, Belladonna's Botanicals, Arsnosis, The Telemancer, Limitless Liberations, and Goetic Impressions for all they do for the occult community out there, and for certainly what they do for the show. Throughout this evening, we will take breaks to let you know a little bit more about who they are, where you can check them out at, and also if we have any promo codes, we'll certainly hook you up so that you can save a little bit money on your next order, either for yourself or for a loved one, because they all make great quality items and certainly something that everyone listening out there should support. Now, if you missed any of our past episodes, whether it be this show or our other show right now airing, which is Pong, Paranormal Guys Podcast, you can jump back and listen to those episodes. As I said earlier, we've had some great episodes this season, few more before we wrap up Season 3 of both of those, and then we will take a little bit of a hiatus until we return back for Season 4 sometime next year. But we've had great interviews, great discussions, and great content, so make sure you go back and check that out. It has been a lot of fun, and we appreciate the support of each and every one of you. Last episode of Knights of the Nephilim, we had one of my favorites out there, which is Baal Kadmon, and we talked about his book Samil, A History, and we went into deep dives of many different items and topics. It was just a great episode, so we had a lot of fun with that one, and if you missed it, make sure you go back and share that around. We also, if you don't know, we air every other Thursday night, 8:30 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Knights of the Nephilim, and then on the weeks in between, every other week, we do Paranormal Guys podcasts. So each and every week you have something to tune into and enjoy, and we certainly like having you out there. Now this evening, we're bringing on accomplished writer and artist Harold Roth, and we'll be discussing the contents of two of his books. It'll be The Sword of Moses, which is a phenomenal work that is ancient and is very powerful and has been translated in the past, though, with lots of errors to it, and Harold took the time to put it out in its entirety and in a great way that I think anyone out there listening that's interested will enjoy. It is powerful. It is something that needed to be redone because of the errors in the past, and he did a great job with it. That came out earlier this year. We'll be talking and deep diving into what that is and what that book entails, and then we'll also be jumping into his first book, which is called The Witching Herbs, 13 Essential Plants and Herbs for Your Magical Garden, and we'll be talking a little bit about that and some other great topics this evening. So make sure you stick around and enjoy the episode. If you have any questions, you can let us know by going through Spreaker.com or the Spreaker app, and that is Spreaker, Spreaker. So Speaker with an R, that is our hosting company. As I said, you can listen from anywhere, but through Spreaker, it gives you the option of instant messaging us during the show so that you can ask our guest questions, give input on things that we're talking about, and I will read those things off as they come in. So feel free to jump in. We always have a lot of people tuning in and having fun with that. And other than that, join us, grab your ritual athames, put on your ceremonial attire, light your candles, and focus your desire. Step into the circle and intone the sacred names. Give offering and praise as we stare into the flames and conjure the spirit that is Harold Roth.
Locked behind that door.
Horror. No normal mind can imagine something even more terrible than you.
Now my default friend. Like all quantities, horror has its ultimate. And I'm that.
There is a horror beyond yours. And it's in there. Locked behind that door.
Good evening, folks, and thank you for tuning in out there. We are live with Harold Roth. Harold, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you here. I look forward to jumping into some, thought-provoking content with you, certainly with both of your books, and it's pretty exciting to get to talk about this.
Cool.
So Absolutely. And I like to start out conventional with the way I do my interviews. And I always start off with the most basic of questions is really, how did you get into, the occult? How did you get into witchcraft? What started your journey as far as saying, this is something I want to pursue, not only as a personal practice, but as something that I want to teach on, something I want to write and put content out there for the greater masses?
Well, it's mostly we had this series of books when I was a kid, Time Life books, right? And one of them was about alchemy. And I loved the pictures in there. And even though it had text, I didn't really know that alchemy didn't really have anything to do with magic. I just assumed that it did because it seemed very magical in terms of the graphics. So that's what got me interested in magic in the first place. And I think I was like maybe, 13. And eventually I realized that magic, and there was all different kinds of magic, and alchemy was not part of that. But there was, for instance, D. Lawrence's book, I think it's called, I can't remember the name of it. It was a big black book with a fancy design on the cover, and they had it in our library. So I took it out, and I think it's called Book of Black Magic. I'm pretty sure it has black magic in there, and in the title, and that was like, oh boy, I got to know about this. So there was that, and then I got a tarot deck. We moved to a suburb of Chicago, and I went down to the Occult bookstore, which is still in existence. That was like, 50 years ago. And that was it. It was a slippery slope.
No, it's interesting that I was saying, I think either to Ball or one of the guests prior to that, my journey kind of started by finding book in the local library as well that was on witchcraft, and it just called out to me, and it was so taboo at the time, and seeing it and looking at the pictures and looking at the stuff they were talking about, I'm like, I never heard anybody talk about anything like this. And I was too young for them to let me take it out. It was in the back section with like the historical books. And so I perjured myself, or I condemned myself, because I said I stole it, and I did return it back years later. The funny part is, 15 years later, I took it back, snuck it back into the same library, and put it back on the shelf, because I'm not a thief and never was, but I knew I had to have this book at home and study it and learn from it, and that's what began my roots into being fascinated with paganism and witchcraft, and ultimately led to Satanism and diabolism and things of that nature. So it was very interesting for me to find that book randomly, and hear that so many other people have had very similar accounts where they were, at the library, and they found a book that just called to them for some reason or another. It finds us.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be that great of a book.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think mine wasn't in the light of like promoting witchcraft. It was actually about the witch trials, and it was about how so many were being condemned and tortured and murdered from this. And instead of that, like, turning me off from witchcraft or pushing me away from it, it actually pushed me even further towards it. That why are all these people being silenced for their belief? What do they know? What are they practicing that these other people are afraid of? And I grew up in a Christian household, and my parents wanted the best for me, and they kind of forced me to go to Catholic school when I was younger, and I hated it. And I got in trouble a lot because I would ask the nuns and the priests and everyone questions that were beyond the scope of what we were being taught, and I would always be told to be quiet or be punished, because I was asking out-of-the-box questions that didn't fit the paradigm that they were painting. And so when I found this book, it was so opposite of everything that I was being taught that I didn't want to know. And it was in line with a lot of the questions I was asking. So when I heard all these other people being silenced just like me, to a much greater degree, obviously, it resonated with me, and I'm like, I need to go down this path. And it was a rabbit hole I jumped in and certainly never found my way back out of, and I don't even try to.
Yeah, me neither.
No, I find it interesting. You put out your first book, obviously, on, witchcraft herbs, which I love, because there's not a lot of people that, obviously in its own niche, there is a lot of people that have put out books, but in the greater sense, there's not a lot of books out there going in depth on the herbs themselves. And yours not only goes into depth, it goes into great lengths of how to obviously grow these plants, the kind of spiritual allies that are behind them, their use and practice, and so much more. How did that come about? Were you from an early age kind of interested in the botany side of things and plants, or did that come much later?
That was later. I really started gardening probably about, I think it was like the mid-'80s. And I just wanted to grow things. I didn't really, and alchemy, once again, was how I got drawn into the magical side, because I came across references to some plants having connections to alchemy, and then I learned how to use plants for dyes and things like that. And that got me started into growing. Datura was the first witchy plant that I grew. And I grew it just because I thought the flowers were cool. But, just being a research, type person, I learned a lot about them. And then before long, I was growing, various witching herbs and realizing that they had something that they, I think this was, that they had something to say to human beings. They weren't like these blanks, they weren't inanimate. They had spirits. They had agency. And that's what got me started. But I wouldn't have written the book and wouldn't have finished it if it hadn't been for Judith Illis, who asked me if I had considered writing a book about witching herbs. And I said, well, yeah, I've been working on this one for like 3 years. Not really getting very far. But she convinced me to do it for Wiser. And so I did. And if she hadn't asked me that, I'm pretty sure I never would have finished it.
No, that's awesome. It's great to find those people that are motivators for you, that, you know, you have something in mind that you want to do, but you're probably never going to bring it to fruition. And sometimes those other people are the catalyst, they're the spark that really brings it to happen. And I love that. Do you think, you know, if it wasn't for her kind of lighting a fire under you to get the first book out, do you think that the magic of the Sword of Moses would have ever come out? No. Okay. So it not only brought upon the first book, but also the second. I love that. Because
I've always been really interested in researching various things. I was in academia for like 10 years. But I didn't really know what to do with the stuff that I gathered. You know, I built a website, which I ran a shop at the time, Alchemy Works, and I built a huge website from stuff that I researched and my experiences with the plants and all. But that was about as far, you know, as I was going to go. And the whole thing about the Sword of Moses was I had this other interest in Jewish mysticism, Jewish magic and mysticism. And but I didn't know, you know, once you write a book about herbs and magic, can you automatically just kind of shift over into, you know, Jewish magic and mysticism? I don't know. So, but again, Judah King really encouraged me to pursue that, and I did. And it was also because of something that I'd come across when I was really young. I'd come across Gaster's translation of it at the University of Chicago Library. And I don't know, it stuck with me. So,
no, and I resonate with that because I actually came across that same translation when I don't remember how old I was, maybe 17, 18 years old. So it was funny because, like I said, I found the book on witchcraft when I was younger, and I started researching other things, and I got heavily into Satanism during like my mid-teenage years, and I was starting to find other books, but one of the first things completely out of my paradigm and realm, because like I was focused on the ooky spooky, you know, so one of the first things that I found was the Sword of Moses, and I started reading about this, and I'm like, what the hell am I getting into? What am I reading about here? And this is so complex, and I got to be honest with you, at the time I had no idea what I was really reading. Like I did, but I didn't. I couldn't absorb it with such a young brain, and I always liked it and always found it fascinating, and it's obviously come up in other, you know, grimoires and other manuscripts over the years where they reference back to it, or they've talked about it, or it's mentioned in passing. And I was always like, yeah, I don't know anything about using that. And then when I seen that you were releasing a translation of it and kind of giving a breakdown on it, I just waited anxiously for it to come out, and I love it, man. You did a great job with it. It's personally a practice. I perform a lot of different acts of magic. It's one that I don't think I'll ever incorporate into my own practice, but I love it. It's just too... I don't want to say it's too complex, because I do a lot of different workings that are very complex and lengthy as far as taking weeks or even months in some of these rituals. But to try to memorize the words, I'm good at memory, but I'm not that good at memory. So I can remember invocations and incantations, or incantations in different spell works, but I can't remember that lengthy of script. So I loved reading about it and getting a better breakdown than I had when I was a teenager. But still, it's one of those things that will always, I guess, remain in the shadows for me as far as out of reach.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense thing, because just having to do the prayers are really long, and that's already and then having to say the divine names for whatever spell, once you get done with the 3-day operation, then there's, whatever spell you want to do, there are divine names to go that you use as, the weapon, the magical tool, and the way of pronouncing them is very tedious.
Yes.
You know, it's just very sort of almost like you were reading Japanese. So it's consonant vowel, consonant vowel. You know, and it's like they aren't real words. You know, so you can't. They're a lot of times acronyms or all kinds of stuff, and I mean sometimes you can tell they're angel names, but anyways, it's challenging, even though it is a way short. Say, for instance, compared to Abermaland, well,
yeah, another very lengthy, tedious operation.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, and that's when I started to try to read some of the names, and like as you said, some of them you do notice as angelic names, and then others are just characters, and you're like, where does this fit in the grand scheme of things? And that's what makes it so mysterious for me, is like who originally compiled this, who created this continuous characters together, like you said, consonant vowel. I mean, you're trying to read it, and I feel like, you know, you're 4 or 5 words in or 8 words in, and you make a huge mistake, and then it's like, well, do you start back at the beginning? Do you just carry on strong? So it is a very interesting ritual, and I love that you said that earlier, like, how do you go from writing a book about witchy herbs to Abrahamic, you know, Kabbalistic writings? And I love that, because that is true. That's one of the things I thought about you over a period of time now, is I'm like, what a strange choice for a second book coming from the first. I love it, because one of the big things for me is I love Kabbalism, and I love studying Hebrew magic, because I feel that there's so much potency there. And I mean, when you start to break down the cosmology of everything that they've put together, there really isn't many systems out there more in depth. And that's something that's always really stuck with me, because I like to be able to, as I said earlier, jump down that rabbit hole and never find the bottom. And you never will. When you start to get into Kabbalistic works, it just keeps growing. You keep connecting more dots, and that's the point, is the connecting of dots. But yeah, I just love the fact that I'm like, okay, we got this strong book on witch plants, and then we got the Sword of Moses. I'm like, I'm wondering if and when a third book comes out, how far.
I'm working on it now.
Okay,
and as a matter of fact, it has something to do with the name of your podcast, because it's about the books of Enoch.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so that's very powerful then.
So there's going to be a good chunk about the Nephilim in there.
I love that. I mean, and that's funny, because we have Frater Barabbas coming on next.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, next month, and he said that he so I asked him, I says, what do we want to talk about for your show? And he says, if I can pick, he says, I would love to give my interpretation and my understanding of the Nephilim giants. And I says, oh, that would be awesome. And he says, I'm not going to say more than that, and whether you know or you don't know, he says, I want to keep that for the show, and I want to present that night some of the fruits of my labor, he said. And I said, oh, that's awesome. Let's hear it. I mean, it's something that's always fascinated me. I've always been into kind of the non-canonical books, whether it be the Gnostic texts or it be the Book of Enoch. I always loved those stories that were left out, you know, but seemed to have more fruit than the ones that were included.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait for the new project, man. I'm sure that's going to be, incredibly powerful. So you heard that out there, folks.
Because let me tell you, it's gigantic.
Oh, is it? No pun, I guess pun intended.
Yeah. Duh. That was a dad joke. Yeah, there's so much research that I'm doing for this that, you know, and then just tonight I was thinking, how am I going to get all these little bits and pieces, you know, attached to each other? It's going to be a trip. I mean, but I like it.
That's what's fun, though. I mean, see, so for me, I've always told everybody, first and foremost, I'm a mystic, and then second, I'm a practitioner. So I love the research. I love diving in. I love the connecting of the dots, like I said, and I love the lore and the theory of behind all these things. And I love, don't get me wrong, I love stepping into the circle. I love being in ritual. But to me, one of my favorite things is just diving deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole. So, you know, with the Nephilim, you certainly can do so because there's so many different interpretations.
Yeah.
There's so many different understandings. Did they get wiped out with the Great Deluge Flood, if we're to believe that they were here? And did they get wiped out? Did they exist? Because they talk about the fact that the water only rose roughly 100 feet, but the Nephilim, whenever they give the biblical interpretation of length, actually stood, from what they said, 400 feet tall. Well, if they're 400 feet tall, then they wouldn't have drowned in 100 feet of water. There's a lot of different things that you kind of start to ponder on, and you're like, okay, this is strange. And then they talk about other races of giants throughout biblical text. So it gets pretty deep, and you can just keep peeling layer after layer after layer back. I love that. So yeah. I will have a third book of yours then waiting on watch when it comes out.
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I want to ask you, with the Sword of Moses, what did you find to be the most challenging aspect of writing that book?
Well, partly, I hadn't been using my Hebrew at all. And so in order to write down all the divine names, I had to use a copy of a manuscript from 1550, and it was handwritten manuscript. I mean, I was seeing a digital copy, and I had to be able to parse out what it said, even though it wasn't written in exactly what I would recognize as the Hebrew letter. It was Hebrew letters, but, he was the manuscript writer. The person who wrote it had his own style, and that was hard. And then, though, I found, after doing all those divine names and whatnot, finding things in there, that my Hebrew was a lot better. Not that I necessarily understood what I was reading better, but that I could more easily read regular printed text. So that was really great. But that was challenging. The other things, let me think. Well, I guess that was the biggest thing, and it sounds like such a simple thing, why couldn't I do that? But for me, I've always had a problem with reading. So ever since I was a kid, I couldn't learn to read in first grade. In fact, they told my parents they'd take me out of school because I'd never learn how to read. But this was before they believed in learning disabilities. But so it was a big deal for me.
Well, you did a hell of a job. I mean, even if you had a learning disability or a reading disability at a younger age, I mean, you grew up to put out a text of a translation and work of one of the most complicated Hebrew texts of magic I think there is. So I think that was a great feat for you to accomplish, and I'm sure felt good for yourself to put it out and say, wow, I did this.
Yes. And in fact, that's why I've always been interested in languages, because it always was a challenge to learn how to read and all that other stuff. And I always have gotten interested in different alphabets and so forth, because it's the graphical aspect. It's that the letters themselves, especially in Hebrew, but any language, the letters themselves are magical and contain magic. So just to be able to write them down. In fact, I developed the font. I made the design for the words on the front of the cover, and then the artist did the background and stuff. But by copying the way that the thing was written, the manuscript, and that's pretty recent manuscript. But at any rate, it just it felt really magical to me, that part. And just going over something that somebody wrote in 1550 by hand, that's just a good feeling.
Oh, I'm sure it is. And that would be very challenging because, as you said, everybody's writing style is slightly different. So it would still be the Hebrew letters, but I mean, it's going to have its own flair to it. And it's going to be so old at this point that not only reading something of that age is tough to begin with, but then you do have the characteristics of that writer's handwriting. So you have to be able to kind of filter out what exact letters are being written, what is being said, and then you're dealing with an obscure text where that's challenging enough in itself, but then you do have the fact that it's not all regular clean-cut words or angel names. It is a continuous, nonstop chunk of text that there is no meaning that we know of for certain parts of it. So I can't imagine the legwork that you put into that, trying to break that down.
Well, I did feel like, on the one hand, it felt like a very traditional academic task. You're looking stuff up, you're comparing this and that. I mean, the translation that was done, I think about 10 years ago, the guy deliberately did not translate or transliterate the divine names. So there was no way, there was nothing I could compare to make sure I was doing it correctly. I just had to, keep working on it. So that uncertainty also, because, it's so, I don't know, I'm not being as expressive as I'd like to be. But like one of the things you do if you're an active Jew and you take part in your synagogue services is that you might read the Torah. And then the thing about that is there are two people there to correct you if you make mistakes. So there's all of this pressure to make sure you do it right, to do it correctly. And even though this has nothing to do with the Torah or anything, it's a powerful, really a sacred text because they are divine names. So it is a sacred text, at least those parts. And you don't want to make any mistakes. And you want to treat it with the right kind of awe. It's so that part was hard, but it was also really rewarding. So
I would imagine, because I mean, you are writing out letters and words, as you said, that come with an inherent power to them in themselves, and you're translating it and you're writing it down, and you don't want to make a mistake, because even writing them correctly is going to have a power to it, and it's going to come into your life in ways that you might not even realize at the beginning, and even still now after the fact. I'm a firm believer the words, as I said, carry a vibratory, resonance with them. So you making this book and putting this out there has not only changed, your life because of obviously authoring the book and putting it out, but it's going to also seep into your life in many other ways for you. So doing it, if you do it incorrectly or misspell it or make errors into it, that also is going to bring about certain changes. So I can understand your hesitancy, on putting it out, and also your carefulness to it. Because as you said, normally there is someone standing behind you correcting it. But in your case, it's just you, so you have to be extra stern on yourself.
Right. So I went over those things 7 times, literally. Oh, wow. Every single word in the divine names, comparing it to the manuscript to make sure that I did it right. Because, the other thing is when you're doing something where it doesn't make any sense for the most part, you might recognize like EL endings on angel names, something like that, or here and there a word. But most of it is just, it doesn't make any sense, and it's not supposed to. I mean, it's not supposed to. But that makes it a lot harder to just go along with it, not lose your place, all that other stuff. So for me, the actual text was like going through a thicket, but it wasn't the passage itself, the going through, that to me felt like a magical or mystical process. So for me, the words, the divine names, well, certainly they are the magic in the operation, right? But it felt like just doing that had a profound effect on me.
No, I can understand that. I mean, and to know that you went through 7 times on it. I am impressed, but I'm not envious.
Yeah.
Now,
I'd probably do it again, though.
I'm sure you would. No, I mean, you did a great job, like I said. Now, before we go much further into that, I have 2 more questions I want to ask you about this book and deep dive into. But before we do, folks, we're going to jump into our first commercial break of our sponsors, and we'll be right back on Knights of the Nephilim right after this. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, Goetic Impressions. Goetic Impressions is a company dedicated to the faithful creation of advanced ritual tools by following grimoire guidelines as closely and as feasibly as they can in the modern world. Follow them on Instagram, Facebook, or their website, goeticimpressions.com, to stay informed on new projects and limited-time items that they roll out frequently. For listeners of Knights of the Nephilim podcast, you can use the promo code KOTN10 for 10% off of your overall order. Again, that is KOTN10 for 10% off of your overall order. And make sure you check out their Facebook, Instagram, and website. Once again, the website is www.goeticimpressions.com. Again, that is goeticimpressions.com for absolutely everything for your ritual needs. Fantastic items, quality items, greatly priced, quick shipping. Can't speak highly enough about these guys. Absolutely wonderful team, and I'm glad to have partnered with them. Thanks, guys. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, Limitless Liberation. I'll read you about this wonderful company from their owner, Elena. Limitless Liberation was inspired by both Lucifer and Belial. Lucifer has been with me most of my life, as far back as I could remember. Belial and I started to work when I was going through a very difficult part of my life. He completely turned mine and my family's life around for the better in a very short period of time. In return, he asked me to create what he called Charger for him. He showed me the designs, so I created the first Charger for Belial, and Lucifer wanted one next. From there, I had spirits lining up with requests for magical items. Some are control freaks, while others just inspire. They are all so individually different, but every single item created has power within it. Each item operates on many levels. They operate as an anchor for the spirit you're working with, thus aiding easier connection between the two of you. They also operate like a power cell or battery, where they already come with an inherent energy to them, but they become stronger as you feed them and pull from them during ritual, as well as to strengthen your workings. Limitless Liberation continues to grow to honor the spirits that we love to work and build relationships with. You can check her shop out at etsy.com/shop/Limitless Liberation. Again, that is etsy.com/shop/Limitless Liberation. Knights of the Nephilim podcast would like to thank our sponsor, Arsnosis. Arsnosis was formed by Diogo Cells Pimentel, an artist located in northeast of Brazil in the state of Bahia, which is the birthplace of the greatest artist in the country. Involved with occultism since 2009, starting in shamanic practices until reaching Western occultism through the paths of Luciferianism, Thelema, Goetic ceremonial magic, angelic and Enochian magic. Since 2017, he has added his art of drawing and painting to magical artifacts, putting the energy of his practice and personal research into the artistic and magical works that he creates. With the auspices of the great King Paimon that governs over all arts and sciences, you can find his work by searching Arsnosis on Facebook and Instagram. It is theurgical work channeled into magical tools made by an adept for adepts. Over time, his work has become known throughout the globe for the care and energy of the will applied to each and every piece that he creates. And with the motto that was propagated in greater proportion by Aleister Crowley, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," he applies the energy of the will of the initiatory path into each and every work. Once again, you can check him out by searching Arsnosis on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks, Diogo. All right, guys, we're back on Knights of the Nephilim radio show. We've been hanging out for the last 40 minutes with author and artist Harold Roth, talking about his newest book, The Magic of the Sword of Moses, which is a book that came out earlier this year. It is a newer translation and proper working of the ancient tome, The Sword of Moses. And I realized, Harold, and I think it's just because of our excitement to talk about it, we didn't really explain to the listeners out there what exactly this operation is for. We went right into it, talking about the complexity of it, talking about some of the parts of it. I guess kind of assuming that anyone listening out there would understand what the Sword of Moses is. But if you could, sir, could you explain to the listeners out there really what is different about this operation compared to others? What is the Sword of Moses?
Well, for one thing, it doesn't actually require any kind of spiritual development from the practitioner. It's really a magic. It's for making magic and very practical stuff. Like I forget how many, I think there's like 130 different spells that are part of the manuscript. And, I only talked about like 40 something of them, but most of them were really very practical, like, how to deal with a migraine. Things like, where, it went all the way up to death spells, but, it was clearly written by a practicing magician, and it was like his or her sort of index to a whole series of spells that you can kind of tell were gathered from different places. Like the first two spells are really general and all over the place, and things are included. But, unlike Abramelin, for instance, where you're going to have contact with the guardian angel, with this operation, you will be calling upon the angel. You have to do a purification in order to do this, a 3-day purification, in order to have any interactions with angels, or just straight up kill you. The outside of that, it is not like you are told, oh, well, if you do this, then you will, I don't know, you will have contact with God. You won't, okay? You will only have contact in terms of using the divine names and being allowed to use them, because that is our right as human beings, according to this operation and according to various different stuff in Jewish magic and mysticism. We God gave us that right to adjure the angel. But so I guess for me, what is kind of striking about this Sword of Moses is how much it's really just like being in contact with another magician who lived, 1,500 years ago, and who obviously had a thriving business doing spells for hire. They were actually hired by their community sometimes, but if not, and in competition with rabbis who would also do magic. So, it was kind of like whoever this person was who wrote this, you could tell they must have been a successful magician. So it's really neat to have that contact. And that's what it's all about. Do this operation, you purify yourself with using divine names. Here are the divine names, and these are the spells that they go with. Simple.
I like that, because it is like angelic spell casting. I mean, it's different than any other system. As you said, it's not like the Abramelin, ritual. It's not coming into contact with your holy guardian angel. It's not like the Shem HaMikvoresh angel system where you're calling upon specific angels and coming into contact with them. It is you using the divine names to cast forth and bring to manifestation a specific, right, a specific desire, and that is happening. So it is kind of its own unique system, but so in depth that, as you said, whoever did it had to have had a successful, thriving business to have devoted this much time to writing it. I don't think someone just carved this out, sitting around doing nothing. This was something that they tediously tried over and over again. And as you said, one of the most important parts of this rite is the fact of the purification, because it clearly states if you do not perform the purification correctly, the angels will kill you. And that's an important thing. And I'm actually a strong believer in purification in any forms of magic. And I know a lot of times in modern day that is left out. I mean, I do a lot of diabolical rites, and I believe in taking ritual consecrated baths beforehand. I believe in abstaining before ritual in different ways, whether that be sexually, whether that be from eating meat, and performing a powerful and proper rite. And you don't hear about that a lot in today's, rituals, and that's fine. If someone's having great success without it, that's great. But I feel that by doing these things, you reach a deeper level of connection with the spirit that you're calling upon. So I love the fact that this ancient tome does say that, you must be purified, or these angelic beings will in fact kill you. And I believe it, because one thing, I forget who was saying it, but there's a big misconception where people think that angels can only do powerful and healing works, and demons only do the dirty work. And I've always told people, no, that's in fact completely wrong, because you could call upon a demonic force to do healing. You could call upon them to do something very good in the world, just like you can call upon an angelic being to kill. And they will. And people, I think modern day tried to flip that on its head and be like, no, angels are for good, demons are for bad. Kind of the old thought, but I see a lot of books coming out like that today. And I'm like, no, in fact, there's nothing more terrifying than bringing the wrath of an angelic being upon someone. They're a lot of times more terrifying than a demon.
Yeah, they would just, they're as far from a Victorian angel as, you can get. They're fire spirits, and they'll just burn you up. That's all. And they don't even care.
Well, you gotta love when people, they have that church view of angels, and don't get me wrong, they can take that form, they can take any form they want, but you have that common view of okay, Michael or Gabriel, and you have they're looking like human beings and this and that. I'm like, okay, well, what if you go to a level above that? What if you somehow channel a seraphim, or if you're channeling a cherubim or something along those lines? I'm like, they don't look human. They're actually quite terrifying, and they don't really. They're not really on the same wavelength as you. So where you're getting this beautiful stained glass window version of an angel, I promise you it is not that.
Yeah. I love the images of angels in Renaissance art and stuff like that. They're beautiful, but I feel like maybe they were beautiful in those particular roles. So like Gabriel, who is, coming to the Annunciation for Mary and stuff. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't want it to be real scary, right? But I don't think they don't really describe. I mean, this particular work does not describe the angels except only peripherally. If you go and look up stuff about the whole bargain with the angels, then they're described as, fire spirits, and that they will burn you up and whatnot. But, it's sort of, well, it's just for the course for angels in Judaism. They're not, they're scary, because they have so much power compared to a human being. And even so, they're supposed to help us do magic. It's like part of the deal.
Well, I think it depends on, too, what class of angel you are really dealing with as well, because, Dionysius the Areopagite, he made the different distinctions between the 9 categories of angels and the 3 tiers, and I think where people get confused is when you're dealing with angels or archangels, they do take on more of a human-like image if you are to see them in your mind's eye or have a type of encounter with them, that they do appear more humanoid in nature, and they seem to be more able to understand you and you them and connect with one another because they are the closest to the human race. They're the closest to our sphere. So it makes sense that those that are closest to us would be the most like us. But as you do go farther up the chain, the less beautiful Victorian style look they have, the less that they're on our wavelength of understanding, and the more, you could say terrifying if you want to use that word, but the more terrifying and unhuman that they really become. And it just kind of makes sense. As the lower in vibratory nature they come, the closer to our vibratory nature they are. The higher they are, the further they are away. So, if you go back to the old text and you talk about the seraphim, well, yes, a seraphim is going to be much different in appearance and understanding and how it operates than one of the principalities or one of the archangels or angels. So it really depends on what classification of being you're working with.
Well, yeah, and even in the Hebrew Bible, when they have various angels appearing, most of the time they look just like human beings, and they can talk to us. We can understand them. Even though there are other angels, like if you try to speak to them in anything but Hebrew, they'll act like they're deaf. So there's some, I guess, who are more stuck up than others, but I do think that it's almost like the way that I've seen people. This is my cat, who is like really old, and she's meowing right now because
that's okay. She wants to be a part of the show.
Yeah, she hears me talking and just like, why? But I do think that the depiction of angels has something in common with, in a culture, has something in common with the depiction of plant spirits. And I think that plant spirits really, they're not human beings. They don't look like human beings, in my opinion. They don't act like us. I mean, they're completely different, a whole different kind of entity. And if we don't know that going in, it can be pretty shocking when you experience a plant spirit. And it's like, it is awe-inspiring. And awe in the sense of fear, but also just being overwhelmed by the beauty, the power, the otherness. And I think that the same thing happens with us for angels. We have these nice little plant spirits that people make pictures of, and they're almost always white people and well-formed and everything like that. But, when I have seen the tourist spirit, it didn't look like that at all. It's completely different. Now, everybody's experience is going to be different. I totally acknowledge that. But I do think there's something about us that we want to domesticate these things. We want to make them into a form that is more acceptable to us, that isn't so other. It's as if the very otherness itself is something that it won't go down. So we have to create these other more, the word I use, domesticated forms.
No, I agree with that. And I've actually said in some of the teachings I've done, because I'll do sermons and teachings for classes and things like that. And I've told people that that's also what happens with demonic spirits so say you're calling upon, Asmodee, or you're calling upon Azazel, or you're calling upon a known entity from lore, from history. Everything that you've studied, everything that you've read, every fear that you have, every inclination that you have of what that being is going to be, all gets churned into a pot of the interaction that you have. So whenever you do have that encounter, that experience, or that visualization, you have a visualization of everything that you've brought to the table, if you've summoned it correctly, you're bringing the current into your sacred ritual space, but then you are flavoring it with everything that you have. So people have visualizations of a being, and some people might call upon, let's switch it up real quick. I've heard people talk about calling or conjuring Belial. And some people will say that he is terrifying and frightening, and it is like witnessing the abyss itself. But then you have someone else say, he appeared to me as a beautiful, gorgeous angel. Well, them are two very different things, and I think that the reason being is some people could just be bullshitting, but the big difference, I think, is what are you bringing to the table? Because I've always said, no matter if you're connecting with the current itself or not, when you are connecting, it is equal parts 1 and 1. It is that current also with what you are bringing mentally and your psyche to the table.